Gold is rising again in a world that no longer feels stable. Central banks are buying, investors are nervous. Governments are quietly adjusting their reserves. When inflation lingers, when wars stretch across regions, and when major currencies face political pressure, gold stops being just a commodity. It becomes insurance. Now, look at West Africa. Ghana is projecting national gold production to reach 6.3 million ounces in 2026. Burkina Faso has already crossed 94 metric tons in 2025 and is preparing for what could become a record-breaking year. These are not small adjustments. These are strategic signals. But here is the deeper question. Are Ghana and Burkina Faso simply chasing higher output while prices are strong? Or are they repositioning themselves inside a shifting global power structure? Because production numbers alone do not tell the real story. When a country increases gold output during global instability, it faces two possible paths. It can extract more and export faster, hoping to maximize short-term revenue. Or it can use that moment to strengthen control over the system itself, who licenses mines, who regulates small-scale production, who captures royalties, who prevents smuggling, and ultimately, who keeps the value inside the country. Ghana and Burkina Faso appear to be choosing the second path, but in very different ways. Ghana is working through financial institutions and governance reforms. Burkina Faso is framing gold within the language of sovereignty and national control. One approach leans on institutional management. The other leans on political authority. In this video, we will examine three layers of this. To understand why Ghana and Burkina Faso are accelerating gold production, we must first understand the environment they are operating in. Gold does not rise in calm times. It rises when confidence weakens. Over the past several years, global markets have faced repeated shocks. Inflation has proven stubborn. Interest rates have shifted unpredictably. Armed conflicts have stretched across regions that influence energy, shipping routes, and food supplies. Major economies are reassessing supply chains and trade alignments. In moments like these, gold regains its historical role as a store of value. Central banks have been accumulating gold reserves at a pace not seen in decades. That behavior sends a signal. When governments themselves diversify away from exclusive reliance on paper currencies, they are preparing for uncertainty. For gold-producing countries, this creates a rare window of opportunity. Higher global demand can translate into stronger export revenues. Elevated prices can ease fiscal pressure. Increased output can improve foreign exchange reserves. But this opportunity comes with a structural test. If a country increases production during a favorable price cycle without strengthening oversight, the gains can leak away. Smuggling networks expand. Informal operators multiply. Environmental damage accelerates. Short-term revenue rises, but long-term stability weakens. There is also another risk. Gold prices are cyclical. A downturn of even 15 or 20% can sharply reduce state revenues, especially if national budgets begin to assume permanently high prices. So the question for Ghana and Burkina Faso is not simply how much gold they can extract in 2026. The real question is whether they are building systems capable of absorbing volatility. A temporary boom can finance reform, but only institutional strength can survive the next downturn. That is the economic background behind the production targets we are now seeing in West Africa. Ghana's projection of 6.3 million ounces of gold production in 2026 is not just an increase. It represents a structural shift inside the country's mining economy. In 2024, national output stood at approximately 5.1 million ounces. Moving toward 6.3 million ounces within 2 years signals confidence in both capacity and demand. But the most significant detail is not the total number. It is the composition. More than half of projected output is expected to come from small-scale mining operations. That changes everything. Large industrial mines are easier to regulate. They operate under formal licenses, audited production reports, and structured export channels. Small-scale mining is different. It is geographically dispersed. It involves thousands of operators. It often blends formal permits with informal practices, and it can expand very quickly when prices are strong. This shift means Ghana is no longer relying primarily on multinational corporations for production growth. Instead, domestic small-scale miners are becoming the backbone of national output. That creates opportunity. Small-scale mining supports rural livelihoods. It spreads income into local communities. It reduces dependence on a handful of large corporate actors, but it also creates vulnerability. When gold production becomes decentralized, state oversight must become more sophisticated. Licensing systems must be transparent. Monitoring must be digital and enforceable. Royalty collection must reach thousands of producers rather than a few corporate entities. Border controls must tighten to prevent leakage. If over 3 million ounces originate from small-scale operations, then the real question is not how much gold Ghana produces. The real question is how much of that gold the state can actually account for. A production surge without administrative capacity can lead to smuggling networks expanding faster than official exports. So the 6.3 million ounce target is both an economic ambition and a governance test. Success will not be measured by output alone. It will be measured by. Behind Ghana's production target lies a word that has shaped national debate for years: Galamsey. Galamsey refers to informal and often illegal small-scale gold mining. When prices rise, participation increases rapidly. Entire communities can become dependent on it. Equipment becomes more accessible. Middlemen organize buying networks. And rivers begin to change color. The environmental cost has been visible. Water sources become contaminated. Farmland degrades. Forest cover shrinks. In some regions, local authorities struggle to balance enforcement with livelihoods. This is where the 6.3 million ounce target becomes politically sensitive. If more than half of national production comes from small-scale mining, then the line between formal and informal operations becomes critical. The state must distinguish between licensed community mining and unregulated extraction. It must track volumes, enforce safety standards, and collect royalties without driving miners further underground. The Minerals Income Investment Fund represents one institutional response. By strengthening state participation in mineral revenues and focusing on governance frameworks, Ghana signals that production growth must be accompanied by financial oversight. But institutions alone do not solve enforcement gaps. Digital tracking systems, export verification mechanisms, local oversight committees, and clear permit structures are essential. Without them, higher production simply increases the volume of gold that can leak across porous borders. There is also a reputational dimension. International buyers increasingly examine environmental and governance standards. If Ghana is perceived as unable to control environmental damage, it risks long-term market consequences. So the question becomes sharper. Can Ghana formalize and regulate small-scale mining fast enough to match its production ambitions? Because if Galamsey expands faster than governance reform, then higher output may undermine the very economic stability it seeks to strengthen. Gold can fund development, but unmanaged extraction can weaken the foundations beneath it. John Dramani, Mahama's approach to gold production reflects a civilian leadership model operating under financial pressure and institutional constraints. Ghana has faced debt restructuring, negotiations with international financial institutions, and domestic calls for economic stabilization. In that context, gold is not simply a commodity. It is a fiscal anchor. Mahama's strategy does not rely on dramatic declarations of resource nationalism. Instead, it leans on institutional strengthening. The Minerals Income Investment Fund serves as a financial vehicle designed to capture greater value from mineral revenues, improve transparency, and channel returns into long-term national priorities. This approach seeks to convert production growth into structured financial leverage. Rather than renegotiating contracts in a confrontational manner, the focus has been on improving regulatory systems, enhancing formalization of small-scale mining, and tightening export controls. It is a slower path, but potentially a more stable one. However, this model carries its own risks. Institutional reform requires administrative capacity, political discipline, and public trust. If enforcement remains uneven, or if corruption undermines oversight, then the institutional model can lose credibility. Rising production combined with weak execution can create public frustration rather than stability. Mahama must also balance domestic expectations with international relationships. Ghana maintains strong ties with Western financial institutions and investors. Abrupt policy shifts could increase borrowing costs or reduce foreign investment. So the challenge becomes delicate. How does a government increase control over mineral wealth without triggering capital flight or diplomatic tension? Mahama's answer appears to be incremental consolidation rather than abrupt transformation. Strengthen the institutions. Formalize the informal sector. Improve revenue capture. Maintain investor confidence. It is a technocratic strategy rooted in financial governance. Whether that model can fully absorb a surge to Burkina Faso's announcement of more than 94 metric tons of gold production in 2025 represents more than statistical growth. It represents a political statement. 94 metric tons equals slightly over 3 million ounces. Compared to the previous year, output rose sharply. That increase was not presented as a market adjustment. It was framed as evidence of national control strengthening. Under Ibrahim Traore, gold is closely tied to the language of sovereignty. Production growth is linked to the idea that Burkina Faso must command its own resources rather than depend on external direction. In this model, mining is not only an economic sector, it is a pillar of state authority. A significant portion of production involves artisanal and semi-mechanized mining. Instead of leaving that sector fragmented, the government has emphasized reorganization, cooperative structures, and tighter supervision. The objective is to prevent informal networks from capturing value outside state oversight. This approach signals a shift in tone compared to earlier eras, where previous governments often prioritized investor reassurance. The current narrative emphasizes control, monitoring, and national benefit, but sovereignty-driven policy also carries weight. Increased state oversight requires capable institutions, clear rules, and predictable enforcement. Without those, control can become inconsistent. Investors may hesitate, domestic operators may face uncertainty, and revenue projections may fluctuate if confidence declines. Burkina Faso operates within a challenging security environment. Stability in mining regions is critical. Production gains can strengthen fiscal capacity, but instability can disrupt extraction and transport. So the question becomes clear. Can Burkina Faso translate higher production into sustainable institutional strength? Or will sovereignty remain primarily rhetorical because declaring control is one thing? Building durable administrative capacity is another. 94 metric tons is a mile. Ibrahim Traore's leadership approach places gold at the center of national sovereignty. Unlike a technocratic model that emphasizes financial engineering, Traore frames mineral resources as instruments of political independence. In his narrative, gold is not merely an export commodity, it is a symbol of dignity, control, and strategic autonomy. This framing matters. When production rises above 94 metric tons, the achievement is presented not simply as economic success, but as evidence that the state is reclaiming authority over its natural wealth. The message resonates domestically, particularly in a region where frustration with past governance models has been strong. However, political framing does not eliminate structural constraints. Burkina Faso operates in a volatile security environment. Armed groups remain active in parts of the country. Mining infrastructure depends on transport corridors, regional stability, and operational continuity. Sovereignty in rhetoric must align with stability in practice. Traore's emphasis on reorganizing artisanal mining into cooperatives and tightening supervision signals recognition of this reality. Informal gold networks can undermine both fiscal control and security if left unmanaged. Bringing them under state oversight is a strategic necessity. Yet, concentration of authority also carries risk. When resource governance becomes closely tied to centralized political power, accountability mechanisms must remain functional. Without transparency in revenue allocation and expenditure, public trust can erode even when production rises. There is also the international dimension. Shifts in tone toward external partners may alter investment flows and diplomatic relations. Resource leverage can strengthen bargaining power, but abrupt policy shifts can introduce uncertainty. So, the strategic question surrounding Traore is not whether he values sovereignty. It is whether sovereignty can be institutionalized beyond a single leadership cycle. Because lasting control over resources requires systems that outlive personalities. Gold can reinforce authority, but only durable governance can transform authority into. When gold production rises in politically sensitive regions, international reactions are rarely neutral. Western governments and financial institutions often express concern when resource governance shifts toward stronger state control. The language typically focuses on investment risk, regulatory unpredictability, environmental standards, and transparency. In Ghana's case, scrutiny centers on small-scale mining, environmental degradation, illegal operations, and smuggling have drawn international attention. Foreign buyers increasingly demand traceability and compliance with environmental standards. If oversight fails, reputational risk can affect export channels. In Burkina Faso's case, the concern is more political. When sovereignty is emphasized and contracts are revisited, investors question long-term predictability. Some external observers describe such moves as resource nationalism. The implication is that stronger state involvement may discourage foreign capital, but this perspective requires balance. For decades, many African resource contracts were structured in ways that left limited value inside producing countries. When governments seek to renegotiate or tighten oversight, external stakeholders may interpret reform as instability. Yet, from a domestic viewpoint, reform can represent overdue correction. The tension lies between predictability and equity. International markets prefer stable rules. Domestic populations often demand fairer distribution. The challenge for Ghana and Burkina Faso is to bridge these priorities rather than choose between them. There is also a broader strategic layer, as global powers compete for access to critical minerals. Gold and emerging resources such as lithium gain geopolitical weight. Countries that control supply chains increase their bargaining power. So external reactions are not only about governance standards, they are also about influence. If West African states demonstrate that higher production can coexist with stronger domestic control, the balance of negotiation may shift. But if governance falters, critics will argue that the old model was safer. Geopolitics amplifies both success and failure.